It's weighing in, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special live edition of Weighing In, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast. Bob Adders here, as always, alongside our great NJ.com wrestling reporters, Joe Zadalis, Bill Evans, Ryan Patty, and Jake Afariat. Merry Statesmas to all that celebrate. It's finally here. The state tournament is upon us, and in just a couple days, we'll be down at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City for the 2026 NJSIAA state championships. By Saturday night, we'll have 14 champions crowned in one of just two state tournaments in the country to wrestle down to a single champion per weight class. We're thrilled. We're looking forward to, and we know all the fans out there are as well. So we're going to hit all 14 weight classes. The state tournament was seated this morning at the NJSIAA headquarters in Robbinsville. We've got all the brackets on NJ.com. You can make sure you go there and check those out. We're rolling out our previews as well. We'll be completing those later tonight and tomorrow morning. You can find everything, as always, on the website at NJ.com. We'd love to really go in depth on every single weight class here, but we don't want to have a 3-hour podcast. So, we're going to sit here and hit the finer points of all 14 weight classes and get you ready for everything that's going to go down on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in AC. So with that being said, we'll start things off right at 106, going old school, 106 through heavyweight. This has been a volatile weight class all season. As usual, there's a ton of freshmen in the field, and that usually throws the seeding off where you have wrestlers in a seed that's usually probably lower than what you would anticipate, unless there's some key head-to-heads there. It's been like that all season. We've kind of had an idea of who the top guys are, but this could be pretty volatile the whole way through. Joe, what do you think? Again, a lot of talent in this field. It can go a lot of different ways, but I know you've been looking at it and you kind of have an idea of how you think it's going to go.
If you look at the numbers, there are, a lot of freshmen, as you said, Bob. In this weight class, there are 11 wrestlers with 30 or more wins, 2 with 40 or more. It's a crazy weight class in that, you have a 26 seed with 30 some wins. So, that to me is kind of crazy. But the other thing about this weight class that I find interesting is how balanced and even it really is. The upper bracket has a combined record of 507 and 105. The lower bracket wrestlers have a combined record of 506 and 108. You talked about the seeding process, and you're going to, if you've been following 106 all year in our rankings, you're going to look at this and go, this doesn't pass the sniff test. You have a kid from Paulsboro who's the first seed, and then the kid who we think is the best 106 pounder in the state, Santino Rodriguez of CBA. He's the
Santino Edgar.
Frankie Edgar. Santino Edgar is the number 13 seed. So it's going to take some getting used to, but in these lighter weight classes, if you're a junior or senior, you're going to get the better seed simply because you've had the opportunity to go to Atlantic City more often.
I think to me, what's really interesting about this weight class is you have, in some instances, certainly you have wrestlers who have head-to-heads and, dominant victories, major decisions, technical falls, and things like that. But I think from a lot of the wrestlers that we view as at least podium contenders, a lot of these bouts have been close where you can conceivably look at it and say that could go the other direction. And then who knows how the bracket can flip from there. And I think even more interesting than that, these wrestlebacks can be all over the place. As we know, you never know who's going to drop down into what spot, and a couple guys that we would think are for sure state medalists could meet, somewhere before, the blood round or even in the blood round. So I think that is going to be very interesting. I've been saying it all season. I think 106 is going to be a super fun weight at the state tournament. And, I maintain that. I'm really looking forward to see how this one shakes out. Like Joe, I like Santino Edgar. He's really turned it on. He had the loss to Thomas Blewett of Middletown North in the Shore Conference Tournament Final. Blewett, of course, a big-time title contender with just one defeat. But again, this could really go a ton of different ways. The podium, to me, there's like 8 to 11 guys that can easily be on that medal stand on Saturday night.
I had a coach today told me there could be 12 guys in this weight class who can get on the podium, which is kind of crazy. And then think about this. The one wrestler who beat Thomas Blewett this year didn't even make it to Atlantic City. So, as you said, there's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of things that will happen. And let's remember, when you have this many freshmen, 12 freshmen in a weight class, you never know how a freshman is going to react to the atmosphere down there. Yes, these kids have wrestled all over the country at early ages, but there's something different when you get to Atlantic City and all of a sudden you're wrestling in front of New Jersey people and everybody knows who you are. And that's what makes 106 always, in my opinion, the most unpredictable weight class in the state, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, you mentioned that that Garrett Bunnigan didn't make it to AC. He didn't even get out of the district. And that's with all due respect to him. I mean, he had a very good season. He's a two-time county medalist. But, yeah, I mean, you look at Thomas Blewett's resume, and you're just like, how did he lose that match, right? He's 45-1, has kind of beaten everyone thrown his way. And I remember joking with you guys about it. Like, obviously, he didn't lose intentionally to Bunnigan, but you're like, you wonder if that was all right, like, exhale, let's get ready for the individual postseason now. Because that happened right before, I think it might have been team states that happened right before. But, yeah, you just wonder how that happened. But he's the 2 seed. That's a really fun weight. And, yeah, I can't wait for this one.
You guys mentioned Will Cruz. It was very surprising that he got the number 1 seed. I look at it somewhat similar to when Williamstown's Tyler Hildebrandt got the number 1 seed at 106 a few years ago. He was a junior. He'd been a blood rounder as a sophomore. Same situation with Cruz. He was a blood rounder last year as a sophomore, junior this year. The difference was that Hildebrandt had won his region, whereas Cruz took 3rd in his region and took 2nd in his district. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I do like his draw, though. He's some of the kids he lost to in the postseason, John Tarantino from Red Bank Catholic and Jonas Lusker from Southern. They're both on his side of the bracket, but he would not see them until the semifinals. Same thing with Santino Edgar, who are number 1 ranked wrestler is. He would not see him till the semifinals. So if you're looking at Will Cruz, and he did finish strong at the region. He beat Adam Froelich from Delsey, who we had state ranked most of the year, 13-0 in the 3rd place match. He has a chance to get to the semis at the least, and then see what happens from there. But if he does make the semis, he's on the podium, and I know that would be a big goal for him. So I'm sure he was pleasantly surprised, when the brackets came out, and then he was number 1, and now he just has to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and to Bill's point about upperclassmen at this weight, looking back at the last 5-10 years of 106-pound champions, I am pretty sure Caden Wadle back 2 or 3 years ago was the only upperclassman 106-pounder to win a state title. And part of me wonders, is that because, these guys have been cutting weight, sucking down so much for so long that finally maybe does it, catch up to them in Atlantic City and the grind and everything like that. So, again, I think Cruz, and some of the upperclassmen, that's going to be something to keep an eye on. And, again, these freshmen are only getting better and better. These aren't just your average freshmen anymore. And, I think you look at a kid like Jake Capello from Roselle Park, who beat a region champ 3 times this year, each time by a decision. That's enough to, put you on alert and say, okay, this is a kid that we need to take notice of. And he's an 8 seed as a freshman. And, I think for me, the thing about this weight, like you said, Bob, is kind of anything can happen. It's unpredictable. Kids who you might not have heard of or might not have expected somehow seemingly always find a way. So.
And the lower weights are usually like that, with the amount of freshmen that are in there and their lack of seating criteria kind of throwing it a little bit haywire. But it's amazing what a difference 7 pounds can make, because you go up to 113, and while there is a good number of talented freshmen and underclassmen there, the top 2 seeds are a pair of guys that have been around for a while and are heavyweights within that bracket. The top seed, Killian Coluccio of Lacey, he was a state finalist last season at 106 pounds as a freshman. He was 3rd at 106. So in his last 2 state tournaments, his only defeats have come to the eventual state champion. His freshman year is to Cam Sance, last season to JoJo Burke. He's committed to Virginia Tech. He's looked tremendous this season. And on the opposite side of the bracket, the number 2 seed, the senior Charlie Esposito from St. Joseph Regional in Montvale. Again, a two-time state medalist, the state runner-up at 113 pounds. Get that right away. Two guys absolutely stick out. And you say, okay, can anybody prevent that collision course? And similar to the last weight at 106, you have a freshman from Christian Brothers as a double-digit seed who can kind of be the fly in the ointment there, and that's Shiloh Joyce, who's had a very good freshman year. He's actually split bouts with Esposito. He beat him 4-1 in sudden victory at a tournament, and then during a dual meet at the Catholic School Duels, Esposito got him back and won 5-2. So both those are close bouts. It's conceivable they could meet in the semifinals. You could probably argue, and I will, that that's the most likely course of action. And if that happens, that could be one heck of a semifinal. Coluccio, really a strong favorite, to say the least, to reach a championship out there. So I think that can go one of two ways, too. If you get a Coluccio-Joyce final, Coluccio is a big favorite. He won by technical fall when they wrestled this year. If he wrestles Esposito, that could be a different story. They have a common opponent this season, and Coluccio lost, Esposito won. Those two have wrestled, but it was 2 years ago. So I think that, to me, that's the intrigue with those three guys there. There's some other really talented wrestlers at the weight in Peter Trezza of Middletown South and Matty Ortega of A.L. Johnson, but it's Coluccio and Esposito stand out, and then Shiloh Joyce, kind of that fulcrum there. What happens after Shiloh Joyce?
Yeah, Bob, don't forget about Anthony Riotto either. Bergen Catholic freshman. He's the 6th seed. He wrestled Charlie Esposito tough twice. 1-0 in a duel, and then they met in a duel a couple weeks later in the postseason. And it was 2-0, I believe. So those are two kids who are kind of long, for this size. Esposito is maybe a little taller, but two kids who are pretty long. They lean on their defense. So, when you look at the second round matchup that we probably will get with Shiloh Joyce and Anthony Riotto, I mean, those are two contrasting styles. Joyce can score with the best of them. I mean, that kid is so explosive offensively. And Esposito, like I said, same as Riotto, really good on defense. 2 matches against each other, previously. And you mentioned the split with Esposito and Joyce. So if that eventually happens in the semifinals, if Joyce does get by Riotto, which we think is going to happen, it'll be special. It'll be really special. This weight, I mean, the moral of the story is that the bottom of this bracket is brutal. And Coluccio should get through on top.
Yeah, just a really strong weight. Our rankings, we have Esposito 1, Coluccio 2, Joyce 3, Tristan Rosemeyer, standout from Lower Cape May. The sophomore was a blood rounder last season. Tough draw as the 8th seed. One of his 2 losses was to Coluccio by major decision. So if he's able to win his first 2 bouts on Thursday, he's going to get Coluccio again in the quarters Friday morning. He's going to have to find a way to, reverse, that 8-point defeat. Riotto, you mentioned, ranked number 5 in our rankings there. And what could be a really good pre-quarterfinal bout there would be the 8-9 matchup between Rosemeyer and Ridge's Tanner Connolly. They met during the season, and Rosemeyer had a win by decision. So the wrestlebacks here could also be pretty strong, Joe. This is the case at every weight. We look at the championship bracket first and foremost, but, being a state medalist in New Jersey is a big deal. And the battle on the backside is always brutal.
Well, just go through the upper bracket. Chase Dubuque, the son of the Princeton University coaches, is wrestling Evan Vallejo from Kingsway. Bill has talked about those kids throughout the year. I've seen Julius Feliciano with Toms River East, and Michael Napolitano at Brick Memorial, a senior, a 4-time district champ. All these guys at some point are going to fall into the wrestlebacks. And I think at this weight, they're just going to be savage. I mean, the one thing I will say is I just don't think there are very many people in the bracket, at least none in the upper bracket, who are going to be able to stay with the physicality that Coluccio wrestles with. I mean, we've remarked sometimes that it looks like he's actually trying to injure people. He's not. He's just uber physical, and I think that takes a toll on people. But, like I said, you get into the wrestlebacks at this weight class, it's going to be brutal.
Speaking of brutal, you get to 120 pounds, and you look at the bracket and you say, good luck to anyone trying to get into that final, because you have a 2-time state champ on one side and a returning state champ on the other. And listen, everything seems like it's going towards a Cam Sans JoJo Burke final, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you got to look at, right? And And I find it interesting that, the two kids who aren't freshmen who are going for, they're still alive for 4-time titles, winning 4 state championships. They're going to wrestle each other. So one of those dreams are going to end, you'd figure, obviously, on Saturday. But, Burke, just a couple stats here. Burke is undefeated in state, since his freshman year, I believe. Actually, no, he's undefeated in state, period. The 2 losses his freshman year, I think he took, or maybe he took a couple more. They were at the Beast of the East, and I want to say, Powerade and Escape the Rock, but Cam hasn't lost in state since his freshman year, and that was to Killian Coluccio, when both kids were at 106. But a lot of good state medalists at this weight. You have Carmine Sipper, who I believe had the chance to see. Even Bill got to see him, a couple weeks ago. He's real good. There's no question why he was a state third last year at 113. Michael Daly from Cranford, Kate Collins from Southern, and then Sonny DiMatteo, who's wrestling a lot better now out of CBA. But, Robbie Rodriguez, he's a blood rounder from last year. He's beaten a lot of good kids this year. Daly actually just beat him, avenged a loss from earlier this year. So, it's obviously, you got to look at it and you got to say it's Cam Sans versus JoJo Burke, 2 of the better pound-for-pound kids in the state. Bob, you were actually the last person to get the chance to see Burke. He actually got put in a tough situation there in that final against Michael Echeverry. What do you think about how he looked? I know he's had the wrap on his hand, from his injury earlier this year, but what do you make of what you've seen from him? And we figure he's going to be in the final.
I'll tell you what, that was a battle there. Echeverry wrestled him tough, and he countered a shot and tried to get him in the cradle, and he had Burke in a situation where he was almost folded up like an accordion, and they had to stop it because of potentially dangerous, and rightfully so. I mean, JoJo Burke's neck was bending at a pretty awkward angle. And the place went nuts at West Milford when that happened, but all he gave up was a takedown. He was able to get out of it. And then once he got on top and went to work with his moves, he was able to finish off a pin. So showed certainly some resilience there. We know he's a super talented wrestler as a returning state champion. If that is indeed the final, that's going to be one of the marquee matches on Saturday night.
Yeah, obviously, I think we all think, we're going to get a Burke Sans final, but hey, there's 6 other spots on that podium. I'm kind of really interested in the 3-6 matchup. Ryan McConaughey from West Deptford has had a tremendous year. He was a Wrestleback 3 a year ago. It was up at 126 most of the season, and then late in the year he dropped down to 120. And we said at the time, part of the reason for that was that he had criteria over Colts Neck's Ethan Michaels, and that allowed him to get up to the number 3 seed. He's got a tough quarterfinal against Southern's Kate Collins. McConaughey and Collins were the region champs at 7 and 8, respectively. I think that can be a tremendous matchup. And as I said earlier with Will Cruz, if you get to the semifinals, your top 6, you're on the podium. And I think that should be a great bottom bracket matchup down there, potentially in the quarters, with the winner knowing that they're going to be on that podium on Saturday night.
Yeah, and just a strong group at 120 after that. And again, like you said, it's always a battle to get on the podium, but I think everyone that's looked at those brackets, and even before that, you knew Sans and Burke were going to be the top 2 seeds, and that is the anticipated final. Certainly, if somebody breaks that up, that's going to be one of the major stories, if not the biggest story of the weekend. So we'll see how that all shakes out. There are some weights that you look at it and you go, oh, no one's beating that guy. And I think 126 pounds is one of those weight classes, Joe.
Yep. Paul Kinney, and Paul Kinney. Everybody else is wrestling for second, and I don't think there's a guy in the weight class who would say otherwise. He's on a roll. He's won 37 straight bouts against New Jersey competition. His last loss was last January to a guy some people may have heard of named Anthony Knox, who is now a Rutgers University commit. Since Kenny, as I wrote, unshackled his offense after his freshman year, God, he's a machine. He has, in the 19 bouts that have not ended in a pin, he has allowed only 42 points, which is mind-boggling. So he still maintains that defense, but now he's just so good on offense. He had an overhead cradle in the Region 6 final that was a thing of beauty. Unless something catastrophic happens, I think we can just put him in the final. I mean, who do you guys think maybe could get there?
Yeah, I think it's probably, a question. I mean, a lot of kids can make it, but I'm looking at two names. I've really been uber impressed with Mikey Batista from St. Joe's. He's, been on just a warpath since Escape the Rock, just an offensive menace. He teched Matt Mulligan, who's a state medalist from last year. He teched Joey Polici, who's a Beast of the East medalist. And like I said, can just score a ton of points on you. Just a relentless motor. But Kenny has beaten him, though. I mean, we all have Kenny winning, but Kenny has beaten him, I believe, 3 times this year, and he even pinned him once. I believe that was at the Catholic Duels. You have Tommy Marchetti, who wrestled Kenny tough. There was never really a question if Kenny was going to lose that match or not, but he did keep it close a little bit there, right, in that non-public A final. I think it was 4-0. Marchetti has admitted to me, he mentioned it after the match against Bergen Catholic, where Matt Mulligan gave him just everything he could handle, that he wants to score more points. Like, that's his goal, is to score points. I believe, let me look at the bracket here. I think he can wrestle Mikey Batista in the semifinals. I think that would be the matchup. Yeah. Or the quarterfinals. But yeah, I mean, look, that's the debate, right? It's Kenny, who's probably going to handle business. And then who's going to get there. And how the podium shakes out. That's kind of what we're looking forward to here.
Yeah, and sorry about that. And, obviously we mentioned some of the kids in this field, but, the top half of this bracket, to me, again, obviously Kenny being the prohibitive favorite, that shouldn't take away from just how good the top half of this bracket is. Reed Busby is the 9 seed, has been wrestling really well all year, but, he's got a loss to Sean Elliott, who's the 24 seed from Howell. Matt Gould, who's in the field here, is the 8 seed, is a state medalist a couple of times over. Dalton Weber, 2-time state medalist who's finished as high as 3rd. He's the 5th seed, and he could be on a collision course with St. Peter's Prep's Christian Ramirez, who's a sophomore and only wrestled 5 or 6 times last year, but still managed to pick up the 4th seed. Ramirez beat him in sudden victory in the region final. Obviously we've got some South Jersey flair in the 2013 matchup with Mike Lamb and Christian Hoops. Augie Zamretta, who's a state medalist, is the 12 seed. So, again, I think, it's almost a shame that Kenny is on the top half of this bracket and in this weight, because any other year, we'd be looking at all the head-to-heads here, all the matchups here, all the hardware, and thinking to ourselves, like, wow, this is wide open. And, it's a shame that none of these kids can go back and wrestle for second because of what side of the bracket they're on. Because I think, the top half of this bracket and some of these first-round matchups might be some of the best first-round matches that we'll see.
And then a guy that I maybe a little bit overlooked. That might seem silly to say because he's a 2-time state medalist and he's been a member of 4, team state championship teams, and that's Southern Regional senior Anthony Mason, the Bucknell commit, was state runner-up as a sophomore, 4th in the state last year as a junior. He's the number 2 seed. When Anthony Mason's at his best, he can compete. That could be a really good semifinal if the seeds hold and it's him and Marchetti and Mason's wrestling at a high level. He has just 2 losses this year. One of them was way back in the season opening tournament to Northumberland's Reed Busby in a match where he got hurt in the second period and really had nothing in the third. You're not taking anything away from Busby. And then he had the loss to Paul Kenny. But Mason's looked really, really good. He's had some big wins, and he's a veteran, knows how to win down there. So that's an interesting guy. But on that note, just to illustrate the point of Paul Kenny's dominance, Ryan mentioned the 3 wins over Mikey Bautista, 1 by pin, 2 major decisions. He has the win over Marchetti, and he pinned Anthony Mason in under 40 seconds. So if someone's going to beat Paul Daly, they're going to really have to do something that hasn't been done this year. Crazy things happen in the state tournament. If Paul Kenny doesn't win, I think that's going to be right up there just because of how dominant he's been this season and how much different of a wrestler he's looked like. We've said that all season. We've talked about that a lot. He just seems more free. He's wrestling like the wrestler that had so much hype coming into high school after winning, a world championship as an 8th grader. And he's kind of fulfilling that. The Iowa commit looks as good as ever. And, we're excited to see what he could do down in Boardwalk Hall. Over to 132, we have another returning state champion who tops the field. And this is a deep weight class. But again, like we were talking about in some of the other ones, the guy at the top is clearly the guy to beat, and he has looked awesome. And it's hard to see anyone getting in that way, even though there are some really, really legitimate challengers, Bill.
It's tough to bet against Sammy Spalding. He does have a tough draw though, and Sammy won his first. Still, you'll remember. I mean, he's down 6-0 to Ryan DeGeorgia, defending state champion, and just came back, kept pushing, was great on top, rode DeGeorgia out a couple periods, beat him in overtime, and that's just the way he wrestles. He's always pushing the pace. Nobody can touch his motor. I mean, just nobody in the state. And if he gets on top of you, forget about it. He's going to deck you. But as I said, I mean, there's some potential minefields here. The 8th seed potential quarterfinal, Del Barton's PJ Terranova. I know he was out for a long period of time this year and just came back. He's a very talented wrestler. And this is a very South Central upper bracket. We could see Richard DiLorenzo from Times River East and Colton Haggerty from Washington Township. Both of those guys are returning state place winners. They've wrestled twice this year. DiLorenzo won the Beast of the East matchup 7-1, but it was a lot closer at Region 7 in the semifinals. That was a 1-point matchup. DiLorenzo won again. Got to Spalding in the final. It was a 1-1 match in the third period. Spalding scored a late takedown to win it, but I think that showed that on the right day, DiLorenzo could win that matchup. And there's some other guys up here. Grayson Pettit, the Region 8 champion, is the 21 seed. Very dangerous there. Not a lot of criteria in his last postseason because he got hurt right before districts. But he'll wrestle Derek Sutphin from Immaculata, who not necessarily South Jersey, but was in Region 7. That's a good first-round matchup. He would probably face Haggerty in the second round. That's not a given for Haggerty, as good as Haggerty is, just because Pettit's wrestling so well. So, like I said, I see some potential landmines on the top half. Certainly, we all think Sammy's the favorite there. He's trying to become the 4th two-timer in Camden Catholic history with some legends, Taylor Walsh, Lucas Ravano, Martin Cosgrove. Good chance to do it. Could get tripped up, but I think we've seen Sammy in the past. If it comes down to a scenario late in the match, you're probably going to bet on him. But that's just the upper half, guys, and there's some really interesting scenarios on the bottom half with Jonathan McGinty, the number 2 seed, who's a state finalist, and an Anthony DeAndrea of Watchung Hills, who was a Beast of the East finalist at number 3.
Yeah, and talking about DeAndrea, his state tournament finishes have been 7th in the state, 3rd in the state, 5th in the state. So if he continues on that trajectory, I guess logic suggests he should round out the odd numbers with the state title this year. And listen, that's going to be a tall task, and I think he and Coach Danny Smith and longtime former coach Jim Huff know that. But there's a lot to be encouraged by. Again, making a Beast of the East final, losing only 1-0 to one of the country's best wrestlers in Jack Anello, it's nothing to scoff at. DeAndrea's heading to Pitt next year to wrestle for New Jersey legend Matt Valenti. In the region final against, state medalist in Sal Barmetti, DeAndrea won 10-5. It wasn't particularly close. He got the first takedown, I think, inside of the first minute. Never trailed after that, never really tied, after that. And, if we look at, who he's beaten, he's found a way to win a variety of ways. He has big time, bonus point wins over a kid like, Kieran Rayleigh from North Hunterdon, Derek Sutphin from Immaculata, obviously, Teague Saito from CBA, a few others. He beat Colton Haggerty 4-0 in the semis of the Beast of the East. He's got decisions on his resume, Tech Falls, Major. So, I think that ability to find different ways to win and, be able to, still come out ahead, I think is important this time of year when you're not necessarily going to be able to rely on bonus and everybody's going to be good and the margins are going to be a lot thinner. And listen, to your point, Bill, obviously Spalding's tremendous on top. And so I think, if you're somebody like DeAndrea, your best bet is potentially to try and scramble and tie up with Spalding, but there's no guarantee even that, you'll get out of those. But still, I think DeAndrea's body of work, I think his experience in the state tournament, again, McGinty has been maybe a little bit up and down at times this year. So I think for DeAndrea, he's got a tough road. Obviously the bottom half of this bracket, like we've said, he could easily see Sal Barmetti again in the quarters. Nick DiFrancesco Antonio from Hanover Park's wrestling well. Joey Rizzuto is the 10 seed as a state medalist. from DePaul. Aiden Yarusi is there. Jeremy Negron, who's got over 100 career pins. He's somebody to keep an eye on. So, again, I think D'Andrea would be my bet to come out of the bottom half of this bracket, and I think he'd make it interesting and competitive with Sammy. But, I think Sammy still probably is, the odds-on favorite.
Yeah, I agree with you there with that. McGinty's an interesting one to me because, like you said, he's been a little up and down, but if you can put it together for 3 days in Boardwalk Hall, that's all that matters. And he's a 3-time state medalist. He's been a state runner-up each of the last 2 seasons. Ryan, you know him really well. You've watched him, throughout his career. When he's on, he's as good as there is. It's just a question of can he put it together there? That would be a tremendous story because he's kind of been someone we forgot about a little bit, to be honest. And if he could somehow put it together, win a state title, I mean, that would be a heck of a crowning achievement for the Oklahoma commit. So up to 138 now, where we have some history that we're going to be watching this weekend, not to mention what could be an awesome final if we get one of the ones we anticipate. And even if there's some other possibilities in there, but history will be on the line day one, Bill.
Yeah, Chase Hansen from Lower Cape May has 174 wins. He's 1 win behind Boundbrook's Andrew Campolitano for the most in state history. Also has 114 pins, 2 pins behind Campolitano for the most pins in state history. Potential that he gets the wins record in the second round on Thursday night, and the pins mark could or could not come at some point during the tournament. Hansen's the number 2 seed here. The number 1 seed is Brian Little from St. Joseph Mont. And Little beat Hansen this year at Escape the Rock. It was a little bit of a funky situation. It was in the semifinals. It was that tournament that it was going to snow. It was a Saturday-Sunday tournament. It was going to snow on Sunday. They made a really late decision to turn it into a one-day tournament. Kids who had won their quarters didn't even know until after they won, in some cases, that they were going to have to wrestle another match or 2. And that was a 1-point match. But Hansen is, like you said, coming up on the state record, just won a 4th region title, is looking really strong. He's got a little bit of a tough draw too, and you wonder how he'll deal with the pressure of the record and everything going on. He did well this past weekend. He wrestled Amari Van from Delsey for the 2nd time this year. Earlier in the year, he had to come from behind in the 3rd period to beat Van 7-5. This one was 10-4, took him down in all 3 periods. Van is the number 4 seed in this bracket, so they'll be on opposite sides. But the potential record breaker would come against either Jordan Siegel from Shawnee, another South Jersey guy who was 4th in the state 2 years ago, and Jack Abramson from Pingree. That's the 15-18 matchup. Abramson's a very strong lower seed there. And then, you move on to the quarterfinals. Anthony Caponegro from Monroe's the 7, but the 10 is Solomon Soriente from Caldwell. Hansen and Soriente wrestled earlier this year. That was 4-0. Hansen scored in the 3rd period to seal that. That was a very good match. And then the number, if he gets to the semifinal, then Hansen would probably face Gideon Gonzalez from Bergen Catholic. Hansen has stumbled in the quarters the last few years. He feels he can get over that hurdle. He feels like he's a little better on his feet, feels like he can avoid that takedown that he's given up in that round, and we'll see if he can set make some history, and then also go on and win the state title. But Ryan, that upper bracket's very interesting too. Like you said, Amari Van is the 4, and I think he can get to that final, but more than likely he's going to have to go through Brian Little, who last year was in that 16-17 matchup at 132 with Sammy Spalding. I know the Camden Catholic coaches were a little worried about that, and Spalding just slipped by him on the way to the title. Now this year, Little's coming in at number 1 and with a definite chance to win.
And he's very confident too. He goes by the lawnmower. You saw him hit the lawnmower celly at Region 1. Bob was there for that. But I think what's interesting here is that Little could get Nicky Polito in the pre-quarters, and Nicky Polito's a blood rounder. And these two came face-to-face after their matchup this year during a duel. Little lost to him last year, and he avenged the loss, beat him 4-1 this time. And then you mentioned it, Bill. I mean, that semifinal potentially against Van would be fireworks. It's 2 kids with really similar skill sets, really explosive kids. I mean, both kids, I saw him at the Cali, Amari Van. He wrestled Isaiah Hernandez from DePaul, and he was down big. And he came back and won the match by a lot. And Bob just saw Brian Little do the same against Massimo Gonzalez. So both kids can make up deficits in a hurry. and I think that would be just a fantastic semifinal. But you think back to Brian Little, his freshman year, he had a neck injury, qualifying in Region One's blood round. Head hit the wall, the side wall, and he had a neck injury. Couldn't wrestle at states, and he qualified during that match. Then last year he got pinned by Bobby Duffy in 20 seconds in WrestleBack 3. So, Brian Little, I know, is motivated and wants to get it done here. And then Gideon Gonzalez, the 3 seed, I talked to him after, Region 2 on Saturday, and he feels really good at 138. He teched Gino Shanina from St. Peter's Prep, a couple weeks ago. I think it was actually a couple months ago, but he feels really good at 38, and all of a sudden he's a name to keep an eye on too. So, I would lean Chase Hansen here, but it is chaos here with those top, 4 or 5 kids.
At 144 pounds, the top 2 seeds are 2 guys that, when looking at this weight class, we've said, yeah, that looks like the state final. Is that going to be the case, Jake, or you think somebody can trip one of those 2 guys up on the way to the championship bout?
Yeah, so, on the top half, again, I think Bobby Duffy, probably gets out of there. And, I know Joe has spoken glowingly of Duffy, and so have you, Bob, just in kind of how he's maybe kind of a chameleon in that, like, he blends in and he can sort of adapt to his environment and do whatever he needs to. If he needs to wait his turn to hit a big move and get in on a shot, he can do that. If he needs to go the full 6 minutes, he can do that. And again, he on his bracket, he's got C. Chibler, who's a state finalist for Leonia a few years ago, now at Paramus Catholic. He's got Nate Keller, who's a 2-time blood rounder for Immaculata. But really, I think the question comes in the bottom half of this bracket. Ryan DeGeorge, 19-4 this year. He's wrestled the fewest bouts of any wrestler in this bracket. He missed almost the first month, if not more, of the season with an ankle injury. He's committed to Rutgers. And, for him, I think the key is, he really hasn't been forced to go the distance. And, Ryan and I were talking a little bit about this before. When you're used to beating kids by bonus points and, teching and pinning kids, in AC, the margins get a lot thinner. Everybody's a good wrestler. Everybody who should be there deserves to be there and is there for a reason. And so when you get into the quarters where, you might have Jackson State medalist Armani McCann, or you get into, the semis where you might have Delsey 2-time state medalist Anthony DePaul, you can't rely on getting bonus anymore. And so, we'll see if that comes back to impact the George. And the other thing too, again, so it's not a given that he makes the final, but even if he does, listen, there's the old adage that it's hard to beat a kid 3 times. And that's what Duffy would have to do. Duffy beat him pinned him last year in Powerade when he was up 10-2, beat him this year in the non-public A final. So this would be the 3rd meeting between them. And, again, when you think about it, okay, it was a 6-2 decision. Can DeGeorge find 4 points to close the gap? Can DeGeorge find a way to stay off his back? I think those are the things that really make this interesting. And, we might sound cynical talking about a kid who in 3 years in, Morris Township has made 2 state finals and won a state title. But, I think this is a year where this weight in particular has shown us, there are a lot of viable contenders.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Jake. I mean, you mentioned that DeGeorge hasn't really wrestled a whole lot of close matches. He did wrestle Sausy Say in the non-public A semis when Bergen wrestled against Del Barton. And Say was beating DeGeorge in the 3rd period. And I talked to DeGeorge after, and he kind of just told me, like, yeah, those first 2 periods didn't go my way. And then I just got 2 takedowns in that 3rd, just tried to score points, and the rest was kind of history. So I think he's over, the injury he had earlier this year. And come this time of year, I mean, you said it, the Rutgers commit, the junior, he's been to 2 state finals. He's wrestled and he could have beat Sammy Spalding last year in what was a just outstanding final. This time of year, I trust Ryan DeGeorge. He didn't make 2 finals by mistake, but there's just no way I'm going to count that kid out. But I will say, like right here, right now, I'll say it. I'm going to pick Bobby Duffy to win. I feel like he's that next kid to break through. And, last year he pins Adrian DeJesus. If you pin Adrian DeJesus, if you cradle that kid, you have my respect instantly. So Bobby Duffy, I think he's just that next kid to break through.
Yeah, and to me, Bobby Duffy is a little bit similar to Paul Kenny in the sense where Paul Kenny was freed up after winning the state title. And I think the same thing happened to Bobby Duffy after finally getting on the podium. His freshman year, wrestled back 4, was right there. And then his sophomore season, it took a bit of a step back, eliminated and wrestled back 3. I think those first couple of years, he was a little bit of a boomer bust, home runner, strikeout kind of guy. He can pin anybody. He'll throw a cradle, throw a cement mixer from anywhere. Like Joe said, don't get up to get food when Bobby Duffy's wrestling. You're probably going to miss something pretty good. And I think he's still been able to keep that explosiveness and that danger where you have to be aware that he can pull something out from anywhere when you're wrestling him. But he's also learned to wrestle smart and maybe not take as many risks. His risks are a little more calculated now. And I think that makes him extremely dangerous. So if he's wrestling free, where the Bobby Duffy, what makes him great comes out, but he's also smart in the situations he has to stay smart in, I think you're going to see him getting his hand raised on that center mat on Saturday night. Up to 150, where there's a potential for a redemption story, and that is with the Rumson Fairhaven Jr., Sonny Amato. Sonny is state champion when he was a freshman at 144 pounds. He was the most outstanding wrestler of the tournament. And then last season, which was one of the biggest stories, he was upset along the way by Blaze Mealy, who he had defeated handily, twice before in the season. Mealy from Princeton ended up going on to win the state title. Amato came back and wrestled 3rd, was dejected, but very mature in his responses when I talked to him after that. And that's something that stuck with me. And just talking to Sonny a bunch this year, it seems like that has changed him for the better. His focus is there. He's obviously one of the best pound-for-pound wrestlers in the state. He is the top seed there in a weight that is really good. You have Nick Schwartz from Del Barton right there as the number 2 seed, Jackson Weller from Delran, Michael Kraft, Rhett Washleski. It's a weight class featuring a bunch of state medalists, but you got to like Sonny Amato here. Certainly, I think anytime a wrestler, kind of is upset, now the question is next year, okay, like, can they rebound from that? Can they get back to doing what they had already done and what everyone expected them to do? And I think that's on Sonny's mind. I think that's been on his mind. Is it going to be something that weighs him down in Boardwalk Hall? Maybe tightens up? I don't think so. I don't think that's Sonny's personality. We've all talked to him. He's very fun to talk to. He's loose. And if he stays that way, you just got to like what he does on the mat. He has looked so good this year. The one loss in the Beast of the East where he got caught and pinned, but he's just been really, really good all year. Led Rumson to a 3rd straight Group 2 championship. And he's Sonny's my guy at 150. I'm interested to see what you guys think there. Can someone get in his way? Is somebody able to prevent him from getting to the final like they did last year? I don't know about that. You have Michael Kraft there as the number 4 seed. As I mentioned, Schwartz is on the other side. Guys, take it away. I mean, how do you see 150 playing out with Amato at the top and a bunch of guys who can conceivably contend for that title?
Yeah, I mean, Nick Schwartz is definitely has a shot. I mean, he's had a phenomenal year. I mean, maybe sometimes he gets lost in some of those other standouts in the Del Barton lineup, but the potential semifinal there is Schwartz and Jackson Weller. They wrestled earlier in the year at the Jack Welch Duels. It was a scoreless first period, really good, a lot of action. Just nobody could score, and then Weller took down, and Schwartz was able to turn him for a pin. So who knows what happens the second time around? You probably favor Schwartz there, but at the same time, it was a close match, and it just came down to that one move. Weller he jumped levels last year, and he finished 3rd in the state. Ended up losing to Jaden James, in his bracket. So obviously, that was his only loss at the state tournament. So that was an impressive performance. And Kraft, who's up now on the upper bracket, finishes 4th. And they were at the Region 7 tournament. It was Weller and Kraft and Washleski in that order. Weller ended up beating Kraft 5-0 in the final. That was fairly decisive. And so, I mean, Weller, look, maybe it's a 2nd straight year for a Princeton commit to beat Sonny Amato, as Blaze Mealy did a year ago. We certainly favor him. Sonny Amato did beat Weller at the Beast of the East this year, 7-0. So even if Weller was to jump over Schwartz, that would be a tough task in the final. But Schwartz is definitely, for me, the guy on the bottom that could be really dangerous and would be a very interesting matchup against Sonny if that happens.
Now, moving on to 157. To me, this is a very interesting weight class. You have a two-time state top 3 finisher as the number 1 seed. You have returning state medalist as the number 2. And then really some interesting ways this bracket could break. I think we have someone who's a title contender that's out of the top 4 seeds. Certainly. Bill, what do you think? Cage Jones, is this the year that he gets it done and stands atop the podium? If he does, it's not going to be easy because he's got a lot of guys along the way that could trip him up.
Yeah, he got a little bit of a tough draw as a number 1 seed. Cage is probably one of the funnest, funkiest guys in this entire tournament, regardless of weight. He's a 157 pounder to 6'4", and really, when you stand next to him, he looks like he's 6'10". He is so long, so lanky. He gets on top of you. He can throw that cradle in. He's got all that leverage. He's a pinner. So he's very exciting to watch. He's had a couple missteps at times. Obviously 2 years ago, he made the state final, lost to Matt Henrik, who was a 2-time state champ from Southern, 2-1. Last year, he scores the first 2 takedowns on Wyatt Stout. Looks like in the semifinal, looks like he's on his way. And, Stout just charged back and beat him in the 3rd period. And I know that's one that Cage would like to have back. Escaped the Rock this year. He makes the semis. He's up 10-1 in the semifinals and gets pinned. He just has to kind of avoid those missteps. He's got to, get the lead, get on top, finish the match. And I think he's definitely the favorite here. But as you said, Bob, it's no guarantee. I mean, you look at a potential matchup in the quarterfinals. Joey Canova from Bergen Catholics, the 9 seed. We have him ranked higher than that, and that's assuming that he gets past Joey Ruiz of St. Peter's in the quarter, which is a very good quarter final matchup. If he gets through that, Wyatt Fry is the number 4 seed. There's some guys on the other side of the bracket like Joey Monticello from Hanover Park, Trevor Jones from Del Barton. Cage is definitely the favorite here, but there's it's a tough bracket for him. It's a tough draw as a number 1 seed. And Ryan, just talk about Canova a little bit because that's a quarterfinal potential matchup that I think we'd all be looking forward to.
Yeah, Joey Canova has not. Well, he was in Atlantic City last year, but he hasn't been to Atlantic City wrestling, in the actual action since he was a freshman. Last year he wrestled the Region 1 final against Gavin Hawk on a torn ACL, lost to him. And that's a match that even with the torn ACL, he thinks he should have won. He's just a typical Bergen Catholic kid, a fearless kid. He's built like a bowling ball now. Had a shoulder injury his sophomore year that costed him his entire season. Obviously, like I said, he was robbed of wrestling in Atlantic City last year. Got a text from his coach, morning of the tournament, thought he was going to wrestle on the torn ACL, but he's like, no, he can't go. He's got a torn ACL. That's why he's backing out of the tournament. But I know Joey, got cleared a couple weeks ago. He's real motivated. He lost, twice. He lost to Ryan Mitchell, and then he lost to Trevor Jones. I don't think he trusted his knee in either of those 2 matches, but I think he's feeling a lot better now. He's certainly looked the part. Might not be 100%, but he would not tell you that. So I think that that is not a kid you want to wrestle right now. He's trying to make up for 2 years of lost time. You saw it when he was a freshman. He's real good. He's going to Princeton for a reason. And I would not. Joey Canova is real scary right now.
You mentioned Wyatt Fry, Bill, the Rumson Fairhaven Jr. He's an interesting one to me. He transferred from Wyoming Seminary. We were 7th in prep nationals. None of us knew a lot about him before the season. Now that we've seen him wrestle, he's been an impressive guy. His issue was he didn't have any criteria previously, so no one knew where he was going to be seated. Now, he beat Sean Love, who was 5th place in the state last season, Piscataway Sean Love, in the Region 5 semifinals. That gave him the criteria he needed. He went on to win the region title, did Wyatt Fry, and now he's the number 4 seed. He wrestles a style that I think can be conducive to winning Atlantic City because there's not a lot of wasted motion. He's smooth. Again, he's wrestled at a high level as a member of Wyoming Seminary in the past. He was a key member of Rumson's Group 2 state championship team. Joe, he's an interesting guy there because he's the number 4 seed. So by seed, you expect him to get to the semifinals and be on the podium. But can he do more than that?
I don't know. I guess he could. I mean, this is a kid who rolls around with Sonny Amano every day, who's a maniac. So I'm sure he's been putting in some uncomfortable spots wrestling Sonny every day. I think he can. I think he has, as you mentioned, I think he can get to the semifinals. It's just so hard to wrestle Cage Jones. He's like wrestling an octopus. and he puts the leg in, and you've seen guys like try and peel a leg. Well, there's like 4.5 feet of leg you got to get by to get out from when he has a boot in. But the thing I like about Fry is he's very calculated and he's very patient, and you never see him flustered. So Bill has mentioned that Cage has had some missteps in some big spots, and I mean, I think if you're Wyatt Fry, you look for one of those opportunities and take advantage of it, Bob.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Going back to what we talked about, Paul Kenny, where he's the heavy favorite in that weight class. That's the the hammer meets nail category, bug meets windshield, whatever fun phrase you want to use. We have that at 165 too. Ryan, I hear this Jaden James guy's pretty good.
Yeah, he's okay. He's not too bad. But yeah, I mean, look, Jaden James, 69-0 over the last 2 seasons. He's gunning down another undefeated season, and he's just, far and above everyone else here, with all due respect to everyone else, because there's a lot of really, really good kids at this weight. Josh Papar was a Beast of the East finalist. He has really taken his game to another level this year. Love what I see out of Morgan Schwartz, too, out of, St. Joe's Metuchen. Reed Clousey I saw up close for the first time this year at a Region 2. He looks really good. He's actually my pick to get out of that bottom half of the bracket. And I know, Bob, you and Joe love Jay Clayton. I mean, he's a fantastic athlete. But to keep it simple, my advice to everyone going to AC would be to just sit back, relax, grab a bowl of popcorn, and just enjoy the final 6 matches of Jaden James, because there's kids, there's not a lot of kids like him. Kids just don't come around like he does.
And Bill, you like a wrestler that has a low seed, but you think can do some damage at this weight? Bill's muted there. We'll wait for Bill to unmute himself.
Sorry about that. Ray Miller from Rancocas Valley. He's the 22nd seed. And I think we mentioned some other guys that have jumped levels this year, and he is definitely one of them. The number 22 seed, and I might be mispronouncing his opponent's name, but Lucas Katsayanis from Pope John. That's the 22 versus 11 matchup. Ray Miller, we just moved into our statewide rankings. We have him at number 8, and obviously he's seeded 22nd, so he's seeded a lot lower than we think he could be. And even though it's a tough seed, I think that any seed that you have that is as far away from Jaden James as possible is a good one. He is on the bottom half of the bracket. He is away from Jaden James, and I think that he is a guy that could definitely make a run here. Can he make the final? I wouldn't put it past him. I do think he's going to get on the podium in some way. I know he can't beat Jaden James, but I don't know that he can't beat anybody else in this bracket, and he's somebody that I'm really looking forward to seeing make a run this weekend.
I'm really looking forward to the bottom bracket. Who's going to come out of there? You mentioned Reed Clousey from West Essex having an outstanding season, blood rounder last year, and has really taken his wrestling game to another level. He has 2 wins over Jay Clayton this year, and both of them were by less than a takedown. He beat him, I believe it was 4-2, 5-3 at the Robin Left, and then 4-3 during the dual meet. So that gave him the criteria. He picked up the 2 seed. Clayton is the 3. If those guys met, for a third time in the semifinals, I think that would be awesome, because you would expect it to be a situation where one takedown, one reversal, one offensive move is going to be the difference. Clayton's a 2-time state medalist. He's a kid that really doesn't wrestle a ton in the offseason. 3-sport kid, football and baseball. And you talk to him, wrestling's really kind of his third sport in terms of that, but you wouldn't know it from the success that he's had. But him getting the 3 seed, that gives him a much tougher of a road, because he could have Bubba Gavrish of St. John Vianney, a fellow returning state medalist, in the quarterfinals there. So that's one to watch. And again, with this weight class, Jaden James is there. So there was always the potential of, are guys going to stay in this weight class? Are they going to leave? wrestlers like Reed Clausey, Jay Clayton, they chose to stay, not try to go down to 57 or even up to 175. And we'll see how that pays off for those guys. But of course, Jaden James, the overwhelming favorite to take that title there. 175 pounds, we have one of the 6, I believe, remaining undefeated wrestlers in New Jersey as the number 1 seed. And he's a pretty strong favorite to take the title here. Santino Rodriguez has wrestled as well as anybody else. And I think the Bosco guys, and we'll talk about the other 2 coming up, have been a little under the radar because the Ironmen haven't had the kind of team season they've had in the past. But Santino Rodriguez just on an absolute tear.
Yeah, he's been phenomenal. This has been his breakthrough season, and you kind of saw it a little bit late last year. He wrestled Alessio Parrington really, really tough. The match was really never in doubt for Alessio, but you saw just how good Santino was. And, if there's anyone other than Parrington in the bracket, like Santino could have potentially won last year. You just saw it in that semifinal, gave him everything he had. Alessio couldn't really get to his offense, just a really long kid in Santino who's got even bigger. I mean, him and Cage Jones could play in the NBA with how big they are. But Santino Rodriguez has been awesome. He won his first Beast of the East title. I talked to him after it, and he was just, so excited. He knew how big the moment was for him. He's been banged up. He's had a shoulder injury his whole high school career. It's finally healed now. He got surgery on it twice, I believe, again this past off season. But he's really coming to his own. Then you have a kid in Gabe Logan I'm looking at who, another kid who's been banged up, right? He missed all of last year. He's healthy now, but he's, kind of had a bit of a knee injury this year. He came back from it in the non-public A final where he, took the shoes of Ryder Burnholes, and he came away with a big win by fall for Del Barton to give him 6 big team points. But he's really starting to look healthier now. He did not look like himself against Faith Christian Academy, against Singer, where he got put to his back there. But Gabe Logan, I think he's got to be, the 1A to the 1B that Brock Ozerwitz is as the contender at the bottom of the bracket to meet Santino in what I think is going to be the final. But it should be fascinating. Brock Ozerwitz has looked really good too. I'm looking forward to this one because it's also a deep weight too. You have those 3 kids, but then you have the Anthony Verdes. You have the Cole Dunham. Cole Dunham beat Anthony Verde this past weekend. Angle from Ridge is real good. Going, from Howell. So this is a really fun weight. Looking forward to it. But I think if I were to pick right now, I'm going Santino and Gabe.
Yeah, and there's another undefeated in that on the bottom half of the bracket. Like you said, Bob, there's only 6. 2 of them are at this weight. That's Vince Palermo from Hamilton, who probably not many people knew a whole lot about until probably later this season. He made his first trip to the state tournament last year, went 0-2. I actually talked to him after the region final and kind of asked him about his experience, and he said, yeah, the 0-2 barbecue. So kind of made a little fun of himself, but he's 41-0. He's had a tremendous year. I saw him earlier in the year at the Hamilton Duels wrestle a couple matches. Obviously, in dual meets, sometimes you're not getting the best competition, but he was dominant at the region tournament. 2 techs and a major decision. Tech Southern's Nick Dodonna in just over 2 minutes in the semis. It was really impressive. And then beat Grayson Highland of Woodstown, who was actually the number 1 seed, also a state qualifier last year and this year. By a major decision. I said to him, I didn't even see you go down this whole period. He didn't have to. He's just so good on his feet. When he had the choice, he took neutral and just took the guy down again. And he could be very dangerous. He's the 13 seed because, again, not a lot of pass criteria, doesn't have a state win. But if he wins that first match, he would get Tyler Whitford from St. Joe's Metuchen. Could be a very interesting second round match. And, can he win the whole bracket? It's probably asking a lot, but I definitely think he can get on the podium. And he said he's ready to shock the world, and we'll see what happens this weekend.
Bob, a little bit. It's been a strange year for Brock Ozerwitz, the junior from Townsend North. We had the foot injury from.
Yeah. You're thinking his dad. You're thinking Dave.
Dave. I said Dave. Yeah, Brock had the foot injury, and really he didn't come back till January, and then he wasn't right for a while. People may remember, he got headlock and pinned by Doherty of Rumson right out of the box. But, he hasn't looked comfortable wrestling at 215. But when he's at 90 pounds, he's confident, he's physical, he's aggressive. And the one thing about Brock is if he puts you on your back, he's going to finish you. So, he's going to be dangerous in this weight class if his head's in the right spot, I think, Bob.
Yeah, Brock Oz, he's got a real good tilt. He's really good on the map, but that's a tough road there because, you see Gabe Logan on the other side, and Gabe Logan's looked really good. So that's going to be an interesting one, 175, very intriguing weight. You have the undefeated wrestler at the top and, a lot of podium contenders there, and we'll see how that one shakes out. All season 190, we were looking at CJ Betts, Tanner Hodgins, CJ Betts, Tanner Hodgins, who's going to get there. Well, Tanner Hodgins went up to 215, which by now everyone knows. We've talked about that at length, and we'll get to Mr. Hodgins in the next weight class. But now at 190, you have CJ Betts of Del Barton as the number 1 seed, and you have Nevin Matesic of Don Bosco Prep as the 2 seed. Does anything get in the way of this, Joe, or is it those two guys and everyone else, fighting for the other 6 spots on the podium?
I think those two guys are on a collision course. Maybe there's a bump in the road, but I don't think it's a full-scale head-on. I don't think it's a full-scale accident. It's funny, since Tanner left this weight to go to 215. I did a story last week, and Tanner said he and CJ are really good friends, and he said, we talked about both of us being state champs, which opened the door for the conspiracy theorists around New Jersey that they conspired not to have to wrestle each other. Well, whether they did or didn't doesn't matter. CJ Betts was going to be the number 1 contender, even if Tanner Hodgins was in this weight class. So now he's just moved up to the guy to beat. Any other thoughts out there, fellas?
Yeah, I think for Matesic, he's a 2-time state medalist. He's improved on his finish in states. He's taken 5th and 7th in the state the last few years. He was a blood rounder as a freshman. He's committed to wrestle at Brown. And listen, he wrestled CJ Betts closer than basically anybody in New Jersey this year. He held Betts to a 5-3 decision in the team state tournament. And that's a hard result to overlook. Especially, given how good Betts is, when we look at just what he's done, every other decision that, Betts has wrestled this year was to an out-of-state opponent. And so that's a big feather in Nevin Matesic's cap that he's got to feel confident about coming into this one. And listen, 2 points, again, we see crazy things happen and crazier things have happened. It's not an insurmountable gap to make up. He's wrestling really well. Again, I think having such a vaunted group of upper weights to train with every day in that room, in Santino Rodriguez, in Dante DeLuca, it's a cliche, but it's true for a reason. Iron sharpens iron. And so I think these 3 guys are going to come in really well tested. They're going to come in confident, and I think for good reason. And, again, this is, I think, a shore conference heavyweight. If we look at, guys like Tornik Kajaya, Levi Foote, who I know Bob will talk about, Luke Doherty. But, again, we look at like Adam Sepulveda, a freshman 190 pounder from St. Joe's who took 3rd in the region. You don't see many freshman upperweights. And, when that's the case, clearly the kid is, acclimated to high school. He's comfortable wrestling bigger guys. And so I think, he's definitely going to be one to watch. Timmy O'Rourke, Tanner Hodgins' teammate who he, swapped places with, again, he's been putting together a nice year. So, I think those two are kind of on a collision course, and we'll see. Again, Betts, it may not let Matesic get this close this time around, who knows? But just given that it happened once before and you have that proof of concept, I think this is a final where, it could be more interesting, I think, than people give it credit for.
And Jake, to your point about the youngsters up here, Adam Sepulveda of St. Joe's and Brody Taylor of St. Augustine, the only 2 freshmen in the state tournament at 165 pounds and above. It's really hard to qualify for the state tournament as a freshman upperweight. So kudos to those guys for getting there. We'll see what the kind of damage they could do. You mentioned the shore conference flavor. Alex Reyes, the number 4 seed, Rutgers commit, 2-time state medalist, the best wrestler in program history, try to end it off on top. If the seeds hold, he's going to get Betts in the semifinals. That's obviously a tall order, but I'm still intrigued about it. I want to see how that's going to go. For comparison, Reyes wrestled Tanner Hodgins in the short conference tournament final. Got an early takedown to Hodgins, but Hodgins was able to turn it around and roll to a major decision. And then Levi Foote has wrestled anywhere from 190 to heavyweight all season for Southern. He's strong as an ox. He's got a good gas tank for a guy that's that muscular. He was a blood rounder last season, and that's an interesting matchup. Jaden Simpson of Camden Catholic is very good. The senior, 35-5 this season, returning state medalist. But that's one of those quarterfinal bouts that if it happens, that 3-6 matchup, I'm going to be really interested in, because I think Foote's the kind of wrestler that he can win close matches. He's, again, like you said, he's super strong, and that could be a very interesting matchup there in those quarterfinals. All right, 215 pounds, an absolutely stacked weight. 7 returning state medalists. As we mentioned, Tanner Hodgins decided to go from 190 to 215, and it was already a deep weight class, and that made it even deeper. And that's without Paul VI Anthony Jackson, who had to withdraw from the Region 7 tournament with an injury beforehand. So you lose someone who was a state medalist last season, 5th in the state, but still, Dante DeLuca, Don Bosco Prep, Tanner Hodgins, Nico Gonzalez, Mount Olive, Tyler Palumbo, CBA, Sal Marchese, Delsey, Rocco Salerno of Seton Hall Prep, and Jackson Weir of Lenape, all returning state medals. I mean, that is an absolutely loaded weight. But we'll start with the top 2 seeds. Dante DeLuca from Bosco, undefeated, one of the remaining 6 undefeated wrestlers. He comes in with a 22-0 record. And then Tanner Hodgins down at the bottom, 37-2. Most of his bouts were at 190, but he did bounce around a little bit, 215. Even some bouts at heavyweight during the season. You got to give Dante DeLuca, the credit here. And he's the number 1 seed for a reason. He's a returning state finalist at the weight class. And he's the guy to beat by the seeds. And I don't want to discredit him at all, because he has had a great season and he's a great wrestler going to Columbia next season. You look at what Tanner Hodgins has done this season, and then you see what he did in the Region 6 final. He wrestled Tyler Palumbo of CBA, and we thought that could be a closer match. Palumbo's had a very good season, the Rutgers commit, and Tanner Hodgins won by tech fall 19-3. And that was an eye-opening win for me. And I saw that and I said, oh, okay, Tanner Hodgins is, really means some business there. So if that's the final, that's going to be an awesome one. Again, super deep weight. The wrestlebacks could get crazy. We have state medalists meeting, in the blood round or earlier, and that's going to be something to watch as well. I'm interested to see your guys take on this weight. Hodgins, the Oklahoma State commit, world bronze medalist, all the accolades, is wrestling well. He's been a favorite of ours with the way he's wrestled, but this is a super, super strong weight class.
No doubt, Bob. No doubt. This weight, we've been looking forward to it really the whole season. I mean, our eyebrows have been up, since December and January with this weight. But I will say, I don't think Dante DeLuca, I don't think we've seen his best wrestling yet. After every football season, he carries the ball over 20 times a game, sometimes 30 times a game. And I know that at the end of every football season, he is hurting. His legs are hurting him, his knees, his ankles. And I've been told that this is the worst he's felt after football season. And I think he's finally, coming into his own now. I think you're going to start to see the best of Dante DeLuca. But you said it best, like Tanner Hodgins, when he's at his best, that kid is real good. But you look at a potential quarterfinal here. I mean, Sal Marchese and Nico Gonzalez, these two wrestled at the Robin Leff. Sal Marchese has kind of had Nico Gonzalez's number. I was told that Gonzalez's back was bad that tournament, so we'll see what happens here. I know he's done a lot of research on a lot of the kids at this weight. I know he's wrestling really well. He won MOW at Region 2. He's one of the, 2 Mount Olive kids here, him and Jared Martini, who have a reason to believe they could finish really, really high in the podium. And I know some other kids want to make the podium too, but this quarterfinal can be absolutely incredible. Sal Marquez is wrestling really well too. Kind of poured everything into this season. He's not a football kid. He's a wrestler. He's a kid that we've watched over the last couple of years blossom, and I think you're really going to see it this week. So this is the weight that we all have circled. So I'm looking forward to it.
And last but certainly not least, the big guys up at heavyweight. Listen, it's been really a two-man, really a one-man weight class all season. I don't want to disrespect the rest of the guys. Christian Alvarez, the top guy, Mateo Vinciguerra, and also Tommy Borgia of West Morris. Do we fast forward to the final? Is it that simple, or Can there be an upset along the line somewhere in the bottom bracket to face what I think all of us anticipate is going to be Christian Alvarez there from the top bracket? Jake, you got to unmute.
Sorry about that. I think Vince Aguirre is probably the odds-on favorite. Borgia's had a heck of a season this year. He's a Princeton football commit. He was a state medalist last year. His only loss this year was 4-1 to Tanner Hodgins when Hodgins bumped up a weight. But I think, if you're looking at Borgia, the thing that stood out to me is not that he's wrestled bad competition, but when you look at a guy like Vince Aguirre, who's been at the Beast and some of these other national level tournaments, Borgia doesn't necessarily have that feather in his cap. And so I think that that's something that, could be, maybe a little bit of a hindrance, a detriment to Borgia springing the upset. And on the top half of this bracket, I think the thing that strikes me most about Christian Alvarez is kind of how patient he's been and how he's waited his turn. St. Joe's has been a heavyweight factory the last few years with Jimmy Mullen, with Rocco Delgado. And, here Alvarez was kind of sitting behind both of those guys, maybe a little bit unheralded, more of a football player to start, committed to Delaware, decommitted, and is now focused on wrestling. And he's proven himself to be every bit a wrestler. He's 30-0 for a reason. He's pinned basically everybody. So, yeah, I think until proven otherwise, he's the kid to beat here.
Yeah, Vince Aguirre. I mean, I think a lot of us too are having trouble seeing this not being the Alvarez Vince Aguirre final. I mean, these are two guys that are top 10 in the country. Vince Aguirre is a Maryland commit. His last loss was the Lucas Zalata, who's a Rutgers commit from Malvern Prep in the Beast of the East finals. Every match since then, Vince Aguirre has pinned his opponent, and every match he's pinned him in the first period until the region final. When against Braden Shields, he waited until the second period. He scored notched his 100th pin in the semifinals. I was actually going to try to video it. I missed the button. And by the time I got my finger back on it, the kid was pinned. It was 7 seconds. He's just a monster. Woodstown's never had a state finalist. It would be a great story if he could get there. His coach, Adam Highland, has been coaching at Woodstown for 25 years, 22 as the head coach. He's retiring this year. So Adam could go out as coaching in the corner in the state final, which would be a great way for him to go out as he's really built that program up. And I think it'll be a great final. Do I think Alvarez is probably the favorite? Yeah, maybe just because of the weight. I think they're both fast. They're both technically sound. Alvarez, I think, is probably about 30 pounds heavier. If they wrestled 10 times, maybe Alvarez wins 7. But Vince Aguirre can win this match, absolutely. And he can become Woodstown's first state champion.
Yeah, I think he absolutely can win the match. And, you have to go way back to a common opponent that I like to look at here with these two. And that's Benji Shu. He always came very close to beating Alvarez, but never could. I believe he lost to him 3 times last year. Vince Aguirre beat Benji Shu, I believe it was in that third place match, right, Bill? Was that?
Yes, correct. He beat Benji Shu in the third place match.
Right. So these two might be closer than we think. I think we're really going to find out. And obviously we both watched Bill. We watched him in the BCD's final, but I think we're really going to see how much Alvarez has opened up his game and really improved. He ended up winning the Escape the Rock title in amazing fashion, fantastic fashion. So, I mean, you look at Alvarez and what he's done just through those results, and he's, wrestled a lot of kids who we did have in the indie ranks. And I'll tell you this about Christian Alvarez too. He is not taking anyone in this weight class lightly. He's laser focused on every single match he's wrestling. And I think if these two meet in the final like we think they're going to, don't count out Tommy Borgia. I obviously favor Matteo Vinciguerra, but Tommy Borgia is a state medalist, a really athletic kid. But if these two meet in the final, I think it's going to be phenomenal. I think it's going to be potentially a lot like that Jimmy Mullen, Max Achardy finale there, where Achardy led and Mullen had to come back and rally. I think it could be very much like that.
Well, there you have it. 14 weight classes and our look at each and every one of them as we get set to head down to Boardwalk Hall this weekend. We're going to have wall-to-wall coverage. We'll have stories out the wazoo every single day. We're going to have live streaming coverage, all 8 mats, every single bout you can watch. And of course, that all leads up to the championship finals. We'll also, have the girls finals streamed as well. So you can check that out. And once again, head to nj.com. We'll have previews. We have the brackets up. Again, the links to the live streams, everything you need to get ready for the state tournament. And also on that girls' state final, we will have the great Nick Costco calling that along with Olympian Sky Grote. So we're really excited for that to go down this weekend, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. To me, it's the crown jewel of New Jersey high school sports in general. Every state tournament that the NJSA puts on, this is the granddaddy of them all. You're going to have tens of thousands of people filing in through Boardwalk Hall. There's nothing like it. The spectacle, that center mat, and everything that leads up to it is what makes this sport in New Jersey so unique and so special. So we're looking forward to it, and looking forward to everyone joining us along the way. So for tonight, if you watch this live, thank you. If you're watching this later on recording, we of course thank you as well. And we'll be back, I think, after the states to kind of put a bow on everything. But until then, I'm Bob Adders for the guys, Joe Zadalis, Bill Evans, Ryan Patty, and Jacob Farriott. Thanks for watching Weighing In, and we'll see you next time on NJ.com.